They say love takes everything and still asks for more, and when it finally leaves you, it leaves its shadow behind. I learned that truth twice, first when I lost my daughter, and then when I realized she had been taken from me not by fate but by someone who smiled at her grave. The church was filled with people wearing black, their perfume, and polished shoes, whispering through the marble hall of the Whitmore estate. My name is Samantha Whitmore, 65 years old, and today I buried my only child, Vivian. She was 38, brilliant, beautiful, the kind of woman who built a world from scratch and made it shine. The casket was white, trimmed with gold, covered in roses, so pure they almost glow, the kind of funeral you throw when you want people to think grief can be bought. Beside me stood Chase, my son-in-law, tall, confident, the face of a man who never learned to lose. His hand brushed my arm from time to time, a gesture that looked tender but felt like control. He thanked guests, smiled for cameras, accepted condolences like they were stock options, and when he looked at me, his eyes were cold as glass. After the service, we moved into the grand dining hall of the estate. The air was thick with expensive cologne and quiet greed. A long mahogany table stretched across the room. Chase sat at the head where my daughter used to sit, claiming her place without hesitation. Gerald Marks, my daughter's attorney, arranged papers on the table, his hands shaking slightly. He had known Vivian for years, and his eyes were filled with unease, as if he wished to be anywhere else. He began to read the will. The words were formal, dry, until they weren't. To my husband, Chase Whitmore, I leave the Texas estate, the Aspen property, and Whitmore Logistics, including all its assets and accounts. Chase exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening before he smiled, that perfect smile that had fooled everyone but Vivian and me. Then came my name. To my mother, Samantha Whitmore, I leave the contents of the old folder in my personal safe. The words hung in the air like smoke. Chase laughed, not softly but loud enough for people to shift in discomfort. An old folder, he said. Perfect, absolutely perfect. His laughter filled the room, and I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. Gerald slid the folder toward me, his expression a warning disguised as pity. That's all I asked, quietly. That's all that's written, he said, though his voice told me there was more hidden between the lines. Chase circled the table, his shoes clicking against marble. He placed his hand on my shoulder, heavy, deliberate. Don't worry, mother, he said with that poisoned charm. I'll make sure you're comfortable. A lovely home somewhere quiet, where you can rest. You deserve peace. I looked up at him into the emptiness behind his blue eyes. How kind of you, I said. He patted my shoulder twice before sitting back down at my daughter's seat, her table, her empire. He was already leaning toward the board members, discussing strategies over scotch. The vultures settling around their feast. I stood and walked out without looking back, clutching the folder like it was the last piece of her I had left. That night I sat in a cheap hotel room miles away from the mansion. The lamplight flickered against the paper. When I finally opened the folder, inside was a first-class ticket to Athens, Greece, one way, and a handwritten letter from Vivian. Mother, if you're reading this, it means I trusted you more than anyone. It means I knew you would need this. Chase thinks he's won, but he has only what I let him see. Go to Greece. A man named Andreas will meet you at the airport. Trust him. The villa is yours. Everything I built for you, not for him, never for him. If I'm gone, it's because I didn't move fast enough. Please finish what I started. I love you, Vivian. Tears fell on the page, not from sorrow alone, but from fury, the kind that burns clean. My daughter had not abandoned me. She had armed me. She had left me the truth and the means to destroy the man who killed her. The next morning I was on a plane reading her letter again and again, until the ink blurred into memory. The sun rose over the Aegean as the flight descended. Athens appeared below, white buildings spilling down the hills toward a sea too blue to be real. I had never been to Greece. Vivian had begged me once, but I had said no. Too expensive, too far, too much. Now I understood. She had been building something here, something she never wanted Chase to find. At the airport, a man stood holding a sign with my name. He was in his 50s, dressed in a dark suit, weathered, kind eyes, and a quiet strength. Mrs. Whitmore, he said in accented English. I am Andreas. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you, I whispered. He took my suitcase and led me to a black Mercedes parked at the curb. The drive from Athens wound through mountains and olive groves. The world turned greener, softer as the city disappeared. She loved this place, Andreas said softly. She said it was the only place she felt free. How long did you work for her? I asked. 5 years. I managed the estate, kept things private. Does Chase know about this place? His jaw tightened. No, Miss Vivian was careful. Everything here is under different names. He knows nothing. We turned onto a narrow road climbing toward the sea, and there was a villa perched above the cliffs, white stone glowing under the sunlight, red roof tiles framed by flowers that spilled like color itself. Andreas pressed a button, and the iron gates opened. Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Inside the house was beauty without arrogance, marble floors, high ceilings, soft light, and the faint scent of jasmine. And saw the woman appeared mid-40s, calm, graceful. "This is Maria," Andreas said. "She manages the villa. Welcome, Mrs. Whitmore. She said your rooms are ready. Would you like to rest? Or would you prefer to see the study first?" "The study," I said immediately. She led me through a hallway filled with art Vivian had loved. Bold and defiant, at the end stood a room, facing the ocean, large windows, letting in the sea breeze. A desk of dark wood sat before the glass. A sealed envelope lay upon it with my name written in my daughter's handwriting. Maria closed the door. Quietly behind me I sat and opened the envelope. Inside were documents, bank accounts in my name, property, deeds for apartments in London and New York, investment portfolios, and a USB drive. My pulse quickened. Vivian had hidden her fortune, not for herself, but for me to protect it from him. A laptop waited in the desk drawer, already on no password. I inserted the drive. Files appeared, video recordings, emails, photographs. I clicked the first file, and the screen filled with my daughter's face, alive, composed, eyes sharp as steel. "If you're watching this, Mom," she said, "then he's done it, and I need you to finish. What I couldn't chase is not who you think he is." The image flickered, and the room around me seemed to vanish, leaving only her voice and the sound of the sea outside. "Mother," she began, her voice steady but urgent, "if you're watching this, I'm gone and I need you to finish what I started." She told me everything. How suspicion had first grown like a quiet ache. How Chase's charm hid angry storms. How debts accrued in shadowed rooms. How meetings that seemed ordinary were actually rehearsals for theft. How she had watched numbers vanish from reports and promises evaporate into smoke. She said she had built a secret scaffold beneath the visible company, a lattice of accounts and properties and documents that would open only to someone who knew where to look. She had moved money into safe havens, bought apartments in names that meant nothing to Chase, created trusts and shell companies that appeared like empty shells to anyone who skimmed the books. She had recorded him for 3 years, she said. Every lie, every phone call, every hush payment, and every small cruelty captured in files stamped with dates and time codes. She had photographs of hands exchanging envelopes, emails that proved collusion, bank transfers that traced a path of theft, witness statements from frightened employees who had been paid to keep quiet. And then the breaks, she said, the independent mechanic report she'd had done 2 days before the crash, the fine print that showed tampering with the brake lines, the missing caliper bolts, the deliberate sabotage that could turn a safe car into a trap on a rainy road. My blood went cold as I watched her lips form the words, "I do not have the smoking gun yet," she admitted. "I cannot prove it was Chase beyond doubt, but I know him. I confronted him about the missing money 3 days before the crash, and he promised to fix it. Then I died." She leaned closer to the camera, and her eyes became knives. "Destroy him, Mother," she said. "Take everything. Don't forgive, don't be soft. Make him feel what he made us feel." The video ended, and the study held only the sound of the sea beating the cliffs below. Sunlight thinned into gold, and my hands trembled with a fury that was almost tender. She had not only left me wealth, she had left me a war plan laid out in neat folders and time-stamped recordings. I spent 3 days in that room, each hour a slow excavation, reading spreadsheets until the numbers looked like constellations, watching videos that showed Chase's voice soft and calculating as he moved money with the ease of a man who believed himself untouchable, listening to recorded meetings where he joked about creative accounting as if the joke were a code for theft. By the time I closed the laptop, I knew him better than anyone had known him in public. He had siphoned small amounts at first, like a drip from a faucet, consulting fees and expense reimbursements that stacked into millions. Then the pattern widened until the totals were staggering, more than 8 million diverted into accounts whose owners were ghosts. He had bribed officials to ignore safety reports, falsified documents to save money on upgrades that would have cost him dearly, groomed board members into loyalty with insider tips and late-night promises. He even slept with a woman named Sophia Benton, a 29-year-old socialite who traded attention for favors and whose photos screamed a lifestyle Chase could only pretend to afford. Vivian had everything. She had bank records, voice memos, messages, legal paper trails that would make any prosecutor smile. She had witness statements from frightened staff and audio of Chase admitting things he would never say in court without the shield of a recording. But I was not ready to hand the arsenal to law enforcement. Not yet. I wanted first to make him fracture, to watch his world unravel before the hammer came down. I wanted to take from him everything he had taken from us, piece by piece. On the fourth day I left the study and told Maria I wanted a transformation, not shopping. She proposed a complete reinvention. Hair, clothes, posture, the armor of a woman who would not be dismissed again. We went to a satin-lit salon where hands moved like choreographers. They cut my gray hair into waves that framed my face and turned age into authority. They taught me the slope of a smile that did not plead. They polished my fingernails like promises. Then the clothes, dresses and suits that spoke of untraceable wealth, tailored garments that fit not just my body but a new persona, the kind Vivian inhabited, the kind that slipped past suspicion and opened doors that had been closed to mothers with too many creases in their gloves. That night I stood before a mirror and saw not the frightened woman who had walked into a funeral, but a woman who owned villas and accounts and secrets, who had pearls at her throat and a plan in her head. I called Andreas and asked for help, legal and investigative. He already expected this. Vivian had left instructions and names, among them Daniel Hargrove, a legal strategist who handled delicate matters. Daniel arrived like a weather front, calm and hewn. He had read the files and he smiled the way professionals smile when they find a case that will let them work every muscle of their craft. He spoke in precise sentences about strategy, financial ruin first, then social exile, then legal consequences, until only echoes of Chase remained. He estimated timelines. He measured patience and predicted mistakes. He said desperate men become careless, and we would watch him make those mistakes like a slow trap closing. Daniel introduced Mara Keaton, a former federal agent turned private investigator who had been on our case since before the crash. She spread photographs across the desk like leaves, timestamps and locations and faces. Every trip to casinos, every late night with Sophia Benton, every reckless bet on offshore sites. Mara's eyes missed nothing. She had been following him for months. She had wiretapped transcriptions and hotel receipts and the names of the men who had helped launder the money. She had interviews with employees who had been threatened into silence until Vivian paid them to speak. We built the first blows carefully. We ordered an independent audit of Whitmore Logistics under the guise of routine compliance. Auditors began to comb through the books and found the ghost entries and falsified reports Vivian had already marked with yellow tabs. When the audit was finalized and its language chose by lawyers to be damning without hyperbole, investors would panic and the stock would fall. We were not yet ready to make it public. Daniel insisted. First we would erode his support, show the board that Chase's ship had leaks, and watch the men who had stood by him climb out of loyalty into self-preservation. We created a shell firm for me, AGN Strategic Partners, a phantom European investor with flattering letters and tempting offers. Through that disguise I reached out to board members and whispered opportunities. Some took the bait and began to distance themselves from Chase. The first cracks appeared like hairline fissures in marble. Mara worked the social front. She documented his gambling, the increasing recklessness of his nights in Vegas, the private games where six-figure pots were swept away. She photographed him and Sophia, timestamped and geotagged, and when I began to appear at Dallas events in Vivian's dresses, wearing her poise, the rumor mill spun. I left anonymous reminders for Chase, small disturbances to his day, a quote from a book he knew she loved on his windshield, a photograph of their wedding without explanation on his office desk, a thesis on corporate ethics slipped into his messenger bag, each act designed to worm paranoia into him and to make him feel watched in the way he had watched us. By the time the audit report was ready, we would have already cut the threads that held his supporters. Investors would be nervous, board members already leaning away, social allies cooling, and Chase would be left staggering in a room of retreating mirrors. I stood on the terrace that night with a glass of wine and the pearls Vivian had given me. The sea whispered and I felt the old fear burn into something else, a cold resolve that was not revenge for revenge's sake, but justice reformed into something sharp and inevitable. I thought of Vivian saying, "Destroy him," and I smiled without joy, because some things must be reclaimed not for pleasure but for balance. The rich thrive on whispers the way vines thrive on sunlight. The stories that move between them are currency sometimes worth more than gold. So when someone new and elegant from Europe began murmuring that Chase Whitmore's empire was faltering, the gossip bloomed like perfume at a gala. The same people who once toasted his success now began to forget his name on invitation lists. No one confronted him directly, they just allowed small humiliations to accumulate, one missing place card, one silent Phone call, one event where his table was moved closer to the kitchen, the cracks widened quietly, and I watched every one of them with the calm of a surgeon making the first incision. When Daniel called to say Chase had hired a private investigator, I only smiled. Paranoia was a predictable stage in the unraveling of a guilty man. Daniel assured me our shell companies were layered beyond discovery. The notes I had sent were untraceable. He said Chase was chasing ghosts. I told him good, let him run himself in circles. Let him hear Vivian's voice in every silence and see her face in every shadow. That night I sat in the study and recorded a video for myself. I looked straight into the lens and spoke evenly. I am not a cruel woman. I said I am a mother, and my daughter was murdered by a man who saw her only as a balance sheet. He took her money while she lived her company when she died, and would have left me nothing. She gave me the means to fight back her empire, her evidence, her trust, and I will use all of it, not for revenge alone though. I will not pretend I do not want that, but for justice. For the daughter who was worth more than all the men who betrayed her. I ended the recording and filed it beside Vivian's files, then opened my laptop and prepared for the next move, the one that would drop like a blade. The audit report was leaked on a Tuesday in October, 6 months after Vivian's death. It appeared in the Wall Street Journal from an unnamed source. Daniel, of course. The article was surgical. Whitmore Logistics faces investigation over missing funds, falsified safety records, offshore accounts, and bribery of city officials. The journalist had done her homework, interviews with ex-employees, and analysis of the audit itself. Chase's name appeared 17 times. I read the piece on my terrace in Greece. Sunlight on the sea and coffee cooling beside me, and I thought how beautiful destruction could look from a distance. Within hours the stock fell 28%. By weeks and half its value was gone. Investors panicked. Board members called emergency meetings. Creditors reviewed every loan. Chase issued a statement full of denial, claiming he was a victim of rivals, but in corporate life perception is reality, and reality had branded him a thief. Mara called every few hours. His lawyer quit. His mistress Sophia was posting cryptic messages about loyalty and fake people. She's leaving him. Mara said his personal accounts are nearly empty. He's living on credit cards. The banks are tightening his lines of credit. The estate costs a fortune. 3 months, maybe 4 before the house goes. I told Daniel it was time for the next phase. Through AGN Strategic Partners, I made a takeover bid generous enough to tempt frightened shareholders. The offer came with a condition. Chase removed a CEO and barred from management. The vote passed 12-3. Chase's allies melted away. The announcement was brief. In light of recent revelations, the board has accepted a purchase offer from AGN Strategic Partners. Chase Whitmore will step down effective immediately. I own my daughter's company, the same one he had tried to steal, but that victory was only the first cut. We began buying Chase's debts quietly through intermediaries, the mortgage on his house, his personal loans, credit cards, even private notes from friends, everything at a discount. The creditors were eager to sell once the scandal broke. When we held them all, I called the debts due, every one of them at once. Chase received a dozen demand letters in a week. Pay in full within 30 days, or face legal action. He could not pay. The inheritance was gone. The accounts frozen, the company stripped from him. Mara sent me a video from her car. Chase sitting outside his estate, head in his hands, sobbing. I watched it without feeling. A week later I flew to Dallas, not to confront him, just to see. I drove past the estate at dusk. The grass was overgrown, the fountain dry, windows draped with bedsheets. Through the windshield I saw Chase arguing with Sophia. She was shouting, throwing her arms like knives. He was pleading. She slapped him and hurled her keys before speeding away, gravel scattering. Chase stood alone on the steps of a dying palace, shoulders bent. I drove on slowly, and later from my hotel room sent one last note, a line from Vivian's favorite poet: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. You took everything, now everything is taken from you. I wanted him to know who had done it. I wanted him to fear the truth. Then came his family. The sharks who scented blood first was his brother Landon, always second, always resentful. I arranged for him to discover the old loan Chase had never repaid with emails and bank records Vivian had collected. I let Landon believe he'd uncovered the fraud himself, and then offered him a position at Whitmore Logistics under its new ownership, vice president of operations, a title Chase had once denied him. When Chase begged him for money, Landon refused, told him exactly why. You stole from me, you lied to me, you destroyed Vivian's company, you're on your own. Mara had tapped the call. Chase's voice cracked, then broke. As Landon hung up, the sound was cleaner than applause. His sister Tessa came next, a real estate agent with debts of her own. Chase had borrowed $50,000 from her years ago, promising opportunities that never appeared. I contacted her anonymously, gave her proof, and offered to finance a lawsuit if she wished. She filed within weeks. Breach of contract, fraud, unpaid debts. Chase would have to face her in court, another humiliation, another expense he could not afford. And then Sophia, the final fracture. Mara had collected months of evidence, the affair, the gifts, the hotels, the money. Sophia had squeezed him for more, until she realized there was nothing left. She left him publicly with the precision of an influencer, turning heartbreak into branding. She posted a photo of herself walking away from the Whitmore gates, captioned with glittering self-help wisdom, sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. Hashtags about self-love and new beginnings. Her followers flooded the comments with hearts and applause, while Chase drank alone in a house that no longer belonged to him. By winter he had nothing left but the echo of his own name whispered by people who once smiled in his direction, and my daughter's pearls glowed at my throat as I watched every piece of him crumble. The photograph hit the internet like a spark landing in dry grass. Sophia, standing in a sunlit garden, wearing the diamonds Chase had once bought her, those same jewels purchased with money stolen from Vivian's company. The image spread faster than truth ever could. Gossip sites picked it up within hours, and headlines bloomed across every screen. Whitmore widows, lover dumped after scandal. Socialite Sophia Benton cuts ties with disgraced CEO. The world loves a fall from grace, especially when the man once seemed untouchable. Chase became entertainment, a cautionary tale, the charming predator who had married for money and ended up alone, broke and ridiculed. I watched it unfold from my villa in Greece, wine glass in hand, sea breeze tugging at the curtains. I tracked every article, every comment, every cruel laugh, and I felt nothing like guilt. He had humiliated me at my daughter's funeral, mocked the folder that held her secret, smirked as if grief made me small. Now the world was laughing at him, and I was the audience. Mara called that evening, her voice calm but tinged with satisfaction. He stopped answering calls. She said his lawyer quit the account too. His so-called friends have all ghosted him. He's drinking heavily, barely eating, living alone in that mansion, surrounded by empty bottles and unpaid bills. Good, I said. What about the house? Foreclosure notice filed last week. She replied, the banks, just waiting for the final date, and the Aspen property seized by creditors. I let the silence stretch before saying, then it's time for the social execution. Daniel didn't need explanation. He understood the power of isolation better than anyone. I want him erased. I said, not just ruined, erased. No country clubs, no charities, no polite dinner tables, anywhere he ever felt safe. I want his name to taste like poison. Daniel's laugh was quiet and cold. Consider it done, he said, and he meant it. Over the next weeks, we reached into the veins of Dallas high society, the same network that had once embraced Chase now turned on him with surgical precision. I sent anonymous dossiers to every organization he touched, the charities, the hospital boards, the exclusive committees, evidence of his theft, his deceit, his unpaid debts. One by one his memberships were revoked, his name scrubbed from invitations. The country club received proof of the money he owed and revoked his access. The annual fundraising circuit dropped him without discussion. Whispers became verdicts and verdicts became exile. No one wanted to be near him. It was beautiful in its efficiency. Social death performed with white gloves and wine glasses, and I made sure he knew exactly who was holding the knife. I sent a letter on heavy cream paper delivered by courier, no signature, just one message: you took everything from my daughter, now I'm taking everything from you. How does it feel to be dismissed? How does it feel to be nothing? He would know the handwriting even without my name. 3 months after the audit broke, I returned to Dallas for the Children's Hospital Gala, the crown jewel of the city's charity calendar. Vivian had always supported it, and it seemed fitting that I arrive, not as a grieving mother, but as the new head of Whitmore Logistics. And as the silent architect of her husband's ruin, I wore the midnight blue silk gown Vivian had bought 2 years before, the pearls she'd loved resting against my throat, my hair perfectly silver under the chandeliers. The ballroom shimmered with wealth, white orchids, crystal glasses, soft strings, weaving through the air. 500 guests dressed to be seen. I entered alone, confident. The whispers followed me like perfume. That's her, they said, the woman from Europe, the mysterious CEO who saved Whitmore Logistics, who turned the company around after the scandal. No one dared ask directly. They only watched and speculated. I smiled graciously and accepted their champagne, pretending not to notice how the same people who had ignored me at Vivian's funeral now bent slightly to be noticed by me. Then I saw him, Chase, standing near the entrance in a tuxedo that didn't quite fit anymore, his eyes red and sunken, the mask of charm gone. He must have gotten in with an old invitation before his name was erased from the guest list. Security hadn't spotted him, yet he was scanning the crowd, desperate, looking for anyone still willing to acknowledge him, when his eyes found me. Confusion crossed his face, then recognition, then horror. He started walking toward me, guests parted like water around him. Sensing drama, I didn't move my glass. Steady my smile, polite you, he hissed when he reached me. You did this, all of it. I tilted my head slightly. I don't know what you mean, don't lie. The audit, the takeover, my family turning on me. It was you, Vivian's mother. The old woman with the folder cameras were already rising, phones glinting under chandelier light. Mr. Whitmore, I said calmly, you're making a scene, and you weren't invited to this event. His voice cracked. You destroyed me, everything I built, everything you stole. I corrected him from my daughter while she lived. And after she died, you took her money, her company, her peace, and you laughed about it. But she was smarter than you. She left me everything. You couldn't touch. His face drained. White, she can't have the will. His voice was hoarse. The will gave you what she wanted you to have. The rest was always mine. I met his eyes. No, Chase, the accounts, the documents, the proof of your crimes, they were hers. And now they are mine. Security approached. From behind him he noticed, and panic lit his face. You can't do this. I'm her husband. I have rights. I lowered my voice. Her widower. And you have nothing left. No company, no name, no future, just your reflection. And that won't last long. They took him by the arms as he shouted, this isn't over. I'll destroy you. I leaned closer. You'll do nothing, because you have nothing left to fight with. They dragged him toward the door. Silence hung for a breath, then the noise returned, louder, brighter, every guest eager to analyze what they just witnessed. I finished my champagne and handed the glass to a waiter. This was the moment I'd envisioned for months. Chase Whitmore thrown out of a ballroom like trash, while the elite watched and whispered, perfect justice wrapped in silk. After the gala, his descent accelerated. Mara's updates became darker. He had fired his remaining staff, sold furniture for cash, lived in 2 rooms of the mansion surrounded by bottles and unpaid bills. He's talking to himself, she said. Once we installed surveillance, legally under his consent, for the bank wellness check. He thinks Vivian's haunting him. Good, I said. Let her ghost remind him of what he did. But even desperation has sharp edges. He began forging documents again, creating fake invoices, claiming Whitmore Logistics owed him consulting fees. He sent them to our accounting department, the same one I controlled, land, and brought them to me himself. These are sloppy, he said. The signatures don't even match. File charges, fraud, forgery, identity theft, whatever applies. I told him, that's my brother. Landon said softly, no, that's a criminal who tried to steal from your sister. I answered, file the report. Chase wasn't finished. He hired a hacker, tried to access offshore accounts Vivian had created. The cybersecurity team caught it within seconds. Daniel traced it straight to Chase's computer. We're documenting everything, he said. When the prosecutors come calling, this will be the cleanest case they've ever seen. But Chase was unraveling faster than any legal system could follow. He tried to bribe a city inspector to falsify safety reports for one of his last remaining properties, a warehouse outside Dallas. The inspector reported it immediately. Federal agents took over within hours. Bribery, fraud, wire transfer violations. The walls were closing, and Mara called me the next evening. They're going to arrest him soon, maybe within days. The investigation's been running for months. Your evidence helped, but he's made it worse himself. Where is he now? I asked her. The mansion, a loan foreclosure tomorrow. She said he's got nowhere left to go. I walked out to the balcony of my hotel, the night warm and quiet, the city glittering in the distance. This was the point of no return. The justice. My daughter deserved the ruin he had earned. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the skyline, a broken man sat in a house that was no longer his, surrounded by ghosts and the weight of everything he'd done. The night after the celebration, I sat alone on the villa terrace, the air warm and heavy with the scent of sea jasmine. The laughter from the guests had faded, replaced by the rhythmic whisper of waves below the cliffs. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out at the horizon. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing on my chest, no plan forming in the back of my mind. The war was over. I thought of Vivian, not the woman in the photographs or the foundation name on the marble plaque, but my daughter, barefoot in our kitchen, hair a mess, laughing at something silly I'd said. That was the version I wanted to keep. Not the one taken from me, but the one who lived fully, who dreamed fearlessly. She would have been proud, I think, of what I'd built. proud that I hadn't let her memory fade into pity or scandal. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of the sea against the rocks. I closed my eyes, and for a heartbeat, I could almost hear her voice again. Not words, just the feeling of her presence. It wasn't haunting, it was peace. The next morning, I rose early and walked through the gardens, dew still clinging to the roses. The fountain was running again, the soft splash of water echoing through the courtyard. Everything felt alive, renewed. I'd turned ruin into sanctuary, pain into purpose, loss into legacy. Later that day, a courier delivered an envelope, official, crisp, from the Bureau of Federal Corrections. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note. Inmate Chase Whitmore has died in custody due to cardiac arrest. No ceremony, no fanfare, just an ending. I sat down slowly, staring at the words. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement that a story, long and tangled, had finally reached its conclusion. I whispered his name once, not in forgiveness, but as a final goodbye. Then I folded the letter, placed it in the fire, and watched it curl into ash. From that day forward, I stopped thinking about revenge. Justice had been done. The past no longer needed my attention. I began to write again. Small essays about resilience, power, and the invisible strength of women who rebuild after being broken. My readers found comfort in my words, never knowing the full story behind them. Years passed. The villa became more than a retreat, it became a movement. Women came from across the world to heal, to start over, to find courage again. And whenever one of them asked how I found the strength to fight back, I smiled and told them, strength isn't found. It's remembered. On the anniversary of Vivian's death, I placed a single white rose on the cliffs overlooking the sea. No tears this time, just gratitude, for the love that made me fierce, for the pain that made me unbreakable, for the justice that restored my peace. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, I touched the pearls at my throat, her pearls my armor, and whispered, "It's done, my love. You can rest now." The wind rose gently, and in that soft, salt-touched air, I felt her again, light, free, eternal. I turned and walked back to the villa, my steps steady, my heart unburdened. And that is how the story truly ended, not with vengeance, but with peace.